Hello, and welcome to What is Innovation, the podcast that explores the reality of a word that is in danger of losing its meaning altogether. This podcast is produced by OUTLAST Consulting, LLC, a boutique consultancy that helps companies use innovation principles to solve their toughest business problems. I'm your host, Brett Simmons, and I'm so excited to have Brett Simmons. Brett graduated from the University of Alabama with his Bachelor of Science in Marketing and received a Master's of Science in Supply Chain and Logistics Management from the University of Alabama in Huntsville. He brings years of experience in warehousing, transportation, and operations in industries such as mining, railroad, and consumer packaged goods. Brett is also currently a senior consultant at OUTLAST Consulting and my brother, or I'm his brother, however you want to look at it. So Brett, welcome to the show, my friend.
Hey, thank you. Glad to be here. Thank you for having me today.
So we'll have one of our more civil conversations.
Absolutely.
We talk like brothers in every sense of the word, and always part as friends. So this one we'll try to be keep it entertaining for people.
I think it will be.
So why don't we dive right in?
Okay.
What is innovation?
To me, innovation is a jump in capability or a deliverable that can be a product or service that meaningfully changes experiences in the value chain. I think that there is an art to it, and that art, especially in business application, should be conformed to science. And much of that science is the innovation process. And your blog, Pains of Discipline and Regret in Innovation Work, I think describes some of that really well.
Well, thank you, brother. I wonder about, you mentioned a phrase there. I love your definition. You talk about a leap, a jump, and then you mentioned the value chain. So for people who aren't familiar with that phrase, talk about that a little bit. What's the value chain?
Yeah, and I think the difference between the value chain and the supply chain comes down to really the supply chain is more when you get into it, the logistics, the physical movement of goods and services. When we talk about value chain, I think what we're talking about more is when you're looking downstream at the customer, how in each one of these steps you're creating value. You're creating value for the customer or increasing value to the customer.
Right.
So I think they're very related, but that value chain, I think, is more specific in if you do any type of mapping in this. People are familiar with, how that value is created for the customer at every step.
Right. And so as you sort of zoom out from the supply chain to take the entire value chain into account, it naturally includes other things, starting all the way back to, research and development or strategy and things like that. Is that fair?
Yes, I think that's very fair.
Got it. And so these leaps and jumps that you talked about in your definition, what do they look like in action? So if you're on the ground, how can you tell innovation from just day-to-day work?
That is a great question. And I think that there are a lot of organizations that struggle with that. And I think to answer that question, you have to, innovation does not necessarily need to be purposeful in the outcome, but it has to be purposeful in the environment that's created for the outcome to be recognized and appreciated as an innovation.
Okay.
I read an article. It's called The Discovery of Penicillin, New Insights After More Than 75 Years of Clinical Use. You can find it at nih.gov. And I think it goes into the environment that needs to be created and kind of goes a little bit deeper into your question as well. And I'll just go over it a little bit if you don't mind.
Please.
Yeah. In this article that I read, the discovery of penicillin is a great example of a purpose-driven environment. Many of us have heard this story. Fleming's intended outcome was not necessarily penicillin. He discovered mold that could have affected bacteria, What I think can be missed is the discipline and the structure after he noticed the mold could have affected the bacteria. He isolated it. That lab environment, the processes within it, is what gave us ultimately penicillin, which changed medicine forever. Not from an accident, but from his insight. An important part of the story is that he did not find the mold and they were injecting people, the next month with penicillin. It took time and a lot of collaboration with other organizations to get penicillin mass produced.
Right.
It is an amazing story of innovation and a great read in the time of COVID that shows how medicine continues to be one of the most innovative industries. I think that that kind of, I hope, goes into the environment that has to be created for innovation to be appreciated and recognized.
Yeah, no, that's a great example, and I love that you use that example in particular because it is such a popular sort of story of, oh, this guy opens a drawer and there's mold on it, and now there's penicillin,
Yeah.
and it underscores two things. I think one is the environment,
Hmm.
and the other is just the team nature of it. Because you're right, he made the discovery, had the insight, but that insight is an innovation, right? I mean, I'm
Hmm.
sure there were countless lab assistants, other scientists that collaborated, and
Right.
then at some point, someone got involved in how to scale it and distribute it.
Yep. Absolutely.
And I think there's innovation along that entire value chain, from invention
Hmm.
to inoculation in this case.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I think that's a fantastic example.
Yeah.
You have experience from a lot of different industries, and you can sort of tell that from the way you think about innovation and the way you think about the definition of it.
Hmm.
A lot of the industries you worked in had an element of what we'll call, frontline supervision involved in it.
Hmm. Absolutely.
And as we talked about sort of innovation on the ground and what it looks like, I wonder if you could think about some of the work you've done, be it BNSF or other places you've been.
Hmm.
How did frontline supervisors and the folks that are doing the work on the ground, they're sort of the place where innovation meets the day-to-day work.
Hmm.
Can you talk about a time when something new kind of came through the system and how you approached helping people incorporate that into how they work?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say what should be common, even in frontline supervision, is that there should be a sense of fulfillment and excitement in the solution
Mm,
because ultimately you are solving a problem for people.
right.
That in a lot of cases, makes someone's life more enjoyable. I think that is why we enjoy innovative work so much because that leap is going to really help people. And I think to ensure this, these innovative efforts have to be aligned with your mission, your vision, and your values. Your organization's decisions, whether they be tactical or strategic, it's important that there's alignment with your mission, vision, and values. Understanding that the failure may come, but learning and growing from those failures is key, especially in those types of roles
Hmm.
and really in any role in the organization.
Yep.
And I think that organizational alignment ensures that when you do that root cause analysis of your failure, it will be more successful and it will improve your outcomes in the future.
Right.
It helps create and foster the collaborative environment. So if you look at some of those instances where someone may have to be, innovating, it's an operational environment. There are things happening, and someone has to innovate. Really, they're going to do the same thing that Fleming did, where you're going to, in a lot of those cases, I would go over to my peer and, ask for their insight into something, or would ask my team for their insight into something. But I think that innovation, the framework of it looks very much so the same, is that it's going to be rooted in your mission, vision, and values. And then even in an operational or tactical role, you're going to do very similar things, which is use your training and use your the team around you to come up to a solution. Come up with a solution sometimes very quickly or rapidly.
Hmm. Yeah, no, that's right. That's right. It is important that it's anchored in who you are as a company and to let everything flow from that. And I think that is probably, the best way to minimize the sort of shock of things.
Right. Hmm.
Early in my career, part of my job was to, when corporate came up with something new, I had to go to the plant and tell them how to make it or tell them how to
Hmm.
operate differently.
Right.
And part of doing that was crafting a story that the folks at the plant working the lines every day could see themselves in.
Hmm.
Because a lot of times people would come down and say, oh, this is what we need to do. So change X, Y, and Z, and that's what we need you to do.
Hmm.
But I think for innovation to really work from across the full value chain, as you were saying, not only is it the mission, vision, values, but it's also enrolling the front line in the solution, because a lot of times it's
Absolutely.
easy
Yes.
to think that you know better or you know different,
Hmm.
and to just try to like deploy something to someone, roll it out, steamroll them. This is what you need to do because we said so. What I always try to do was come in and get their help.
Yes.
I talk about the intent. Here's what we're trying to do.
Right.
The problem we're trying to solve. This is what we think is the best way to go about it. What do you think?
Right. And I think that approach, you get more working with people than through people.
Hmm.
And I think that when you push something on someone, and someone that knows their craft or knows their environment or knows their job very well, that in a lot of cases, if you're pushing that onto that person, you're not going to get that very valuable feedback
Hmm.
that will help you, as you roll out whatever effort that you're doing.
Right. And I don't think everybody's, and I know you are and have seen it, but I don't think everybody's fully aware of what rejection of an idea looks like. I think people think, you go and you sit in this meeting
All
and
right.
somebody says, no, I'm not doing that.
Right.
That's what rejection looks like.
Right.
But that's just one form of rejection. The other, there are many subtle forms of rejection. And if you don't recognize them, you won't realize that what you thought was going to happen is not going to happen.
Right.
Silence. I'd rather get yelled at in the team meeting than to have just silence. Oh, here's what we want to do on this shift. Crickets.
I'll give you another example.
Yeah.
Chopped, the cooking show. Are you familiar with it?
Oh yeah. Generally, yeah.
Yeah, I think Chopped is such a great example because you take one of the most creative professions
Hmm.
and you say, okay, I'm going to give you these ingredients that typically don't mesh very well together. And however, through the chef's training and learning, they are able to create something at times that is very innovative,
Right.
because the show places them in an environment that lets that happen.
Hmm.
The baskets, and they get these baskets for a couple of rounds, that the chefs have to use on the show are like the constraints that are placed on many operating teams. So you're given
Yeah.
a certain amount of time whether or not to depart a outgoing shipment in a certain amount of time,
Right.
and you're given certain resources. And I think that show to me is a good example of how in the operating environment you've got to innovate in a lot of ways.
So they're given resources that they didn't get a chance to choose,
Yep.
and they're given an unreasonable period of time to solve the problem. Yeah, that sounds exactly like every problem I've been given in the corporate world. So you're right. I should watch this show. Yeah, no, just here's a basket of stuff, and here's what we need, and we need it in an hour. So, and you will be judged on it.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, and something I know you've watched is Ron Howard's Apollo 13, right?
Yep. Hmm.
What line do you particularly remember from that movie?
I mean, the one that gets all the play is Houston, we've had a problem.
Houston, we have a problem, right? But one of the most memorable lines to me is when Ed Harris's character says, I suggest you invent a way to put a square peg in a round hole rapidly.
Hmm.
And it was great because in this time of urgency, they knew they had to be innovators. What I like to point out is this mission was in, I think, 1970. Before that, in 1961, I believe, was Kennedy's speech about safely going to the moon. And I don't have the transcript of that speech, but Kennedy didn't say, get ready to put a square peg in a round hole.
Yeah.
He didn't have to say that. That vision enabled the NASA team to create an environment for innovation in a time and resource bound situation. Because ultimately, I don't think they put a square peg in a round hole. That was the problem. They used their resources in a time critical situation to invent a solution to that problem. And I think that happens every day.
Yeah, no, that's a great point and a great example to kind of make real what happens every single day at work.
Mhm.
You know, people have innovation departments, they have chief innovation officers, they have teams in charge of innovation and project teams that meet in conference rooms and decide all these innovative things and go off and have these workshops. But innovation is not a job title, it's not a workshop,
Mhm.
it's none of those things. It's not a tool. It is a way of thinking.
Yes.
And some of the most innovative people I've ever worked with are line operators
Absolutely.
and the people that supervise and manage the work on a day-to-day basis. And you're right. People are putting square pegs in round holes across America and making it look like business as usual, which is a form of genius, I think. I
Yes.
mean, there are so many things that could go wrong, especially with the strain that's put on our supply chain right now,
Mhm.
and the way the implications that has on everything. People are coming up with innovative solutions in the moment
Mhm.
across America every day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that many times innovation does benefit from a sense of urgency, right? I mean, you
Hmm.
look at the example I used with Chopped and then talking about Ron Howard's Apollo 13, there was a sense of urgency. I don't think that means that your innovative process needs an expiration date, but I do believe it needs some sense of urgency
Hmm.
because ultimately there is a problem to be solved.
Right. Right. Yeah. Constraints. I always say creativity and the innovation crave constraints
Mhm.
because that's what you bounce off of. You know,
Mhm.
you're exactly right. And the sense of urgency is another form of a constraint in that when you time bound something, it really puts me anyway in a different mode
Mhm.
figuring it out.
Mhm.
And I think it also forces you into a place of prioritization and streamlining.
That's a great point.
And, without the specific constraint of being time bounded, it's very easy to try to do everything and know everything
Mhm.
and get stuck in divergent thinking and not pushed into convergent thinking
Mhm.
where you need to be to get things done.
That is a great point. Yeah, especially the do and know everything. Especially we talked
Hmm.
about frontline supervision.
Hmm.
That is a challenge for a lot of people, especially new frontline supervisors. You're not going to know everything, and you're not going to be able to do everything. But typically, you've got a group of people, and within that group, you're going to be able to accomplish your goals if you work with and not just through someone. It's a great point.
Oh, well said. Well said. So one thing the unique part of this specific episode is that you and I have known each other for a long time, and we've known the same group of people. We've known a similar group of people for a long time.
All right.
But one of the things that comes to mind
Mhm.
is, you and I have worked for a lot of big companies and
Mhm.
done things, you've lived all over America and everything.
Mhm.
A lot of what I apply to innovation problems on a day-to-day basis came from what I learned in Enterprise, Alabama,
Mhm.
from our parents, from our grandparents, great grandparents,
Mhm.
people at church.
Mhm.
And I wonder, do you find yourself thinking back to those lessons as well, or is it just me?
No, I think I've talked about Southeast Alabama with all of my teams, all of my leadership, with all of my peers,
Hmm.
because I think, and I don't think this necessarily is unique to Southeast Alabama,
Right.
but I think what we were able to see was a group of people who innovated because it was a necessity, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that going back to Apollo 13, right, the necessity was, hey, we've got to, because Kennedy's vision, right, was that they return safely. We've got to return these great Americans safely to Earth, right?
Yep.
And so I think that we had a front row seat to people who had to innovate based on necessity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that in a place now, right, where there's so much abundance, is that we can sometimes lose that urgency to innovate.
Mm.
I think that that is really one of the lessons that I learned from my childhood growing up in Southeast Alabama is necessity is going to push a lot of innovations.
Yeah.
And how you create that necessity in your teams or your groups, that may look different within the vision,
Yeah.
the mission, and the values.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. They say necessity is the mother of invention. It's also the mother of innovation, I think, in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And we did see people, making a way out of no way, as they would say in church. But the things people were able to accomplish and create and deliver in that environment with scarce resources and not always any type of formal education, it just reminds you that necessity, I think, is a key component of it. What it reminds me of is that there are a lot of different ways to learn things. Because I don't know a lot of folks that I would say are smarter or more capable of problem solving or innovative thinking than our grandmother.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or, I don't know many better coaches than our great grandmother.
Right.
So I think the key is, separating learning and education and being able to see capability and enroll people from all backgrounds and from all different types of training in the process of innovation.
Right. It's a great point.
Because you do not know where that next brilliant idea is coming from. And it's not necessarily the Harvard MBA that is going to be the best at solving the problem, because, a lot of times it's the person with the necessity to solve it that gets the most creative.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think we were in a great environment for the work we're doing today, and, stop by some other places to learn a few other things. But I think we left enterprise probably with a lot of the foundational principles that we use today.
Yeah, and I think, it is a city of progress. And I think that learning is about exposure. So if you take a person, we have a certain number of years and experience at OUTLAST, right?
Yeah.
But if you take OUTLAST, or if you take any organization and you are effective in working with other people, then you're going to look at a problem through all those different eyes, and you're getting more experience and you're getting more exposure and you're getting more knowledge that ultimately the collaborative environment just continues to expand on those things.
Right.
I think our grandparents were very good at taking their experiences and communicating them to us. And then we're going to communicate those experiences on something like this podcast.
Yeah.
We're going to communicate those experiences, and we're going to pass them on to other people. And hopefully they're going to use those to help solve a problem that's going to make somebody's life easy or more enjoyable.
Right. Yeah. Well said. And the collaborative environment is a great call out, because if you don't have that collaborative environment, you can't fully leverage the different points of view and the different perspectives that exist. Even if you bring them into the room, if the incentives aren't aligned the right way, or if, there's territorialism or siloed thinking, you're still not going to get the full value of it if you haven't created that environment of collaboration. And it also seems to me that there's a natural tendency in the innovation world, where it's been labeled, these are the innovation folks, to break away, to sequester, or, kind of, well, let's take these people and separate them from everybody else so that they can focus on this problem. When if you look back across history, it's been the exact opposite that has led to real innovation. At the peak of the space programs, you mentioned the space program, there were 350,000 people in America working on the space program through contractors directly on at NASA. It wasn't, let's find the 20 smartest people and lock them in a room.
That's a great point. Yeah, yeah.
It's really fascinating how that kind of became the move. Is let's take some people we think can solve this problem and separate them from everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
It's never been the path to impact through innovation.
Mm-hmm.
You have things like the Motorola Razor and the development of that, or
Mm-hmm.
when Ford wanted to create the new Mustang,
Mm-hmm.
where they sent people off, separated them to work on it.
Mm-hmm.
And, they came back with the Razor was arguably one of the most impactful phones in the history of the industry.
Mm-hmm.
Sold, iPhone level, the Razor. People forget about the Motorola Razor. It was before the BlackBerry and before the iPhone. The Razor was those things. Google it, young people, RAZR. But those sorts of things, you talk about them now. The Mustang has been updated since that big rethink, and the Razor doesn't exist anymore.
Right. Right.
So it's great to create something breakthrough and to create something, take people aside and give them something to work on, and they will come back with something great. But will they come back with something enduring and something that solves a lasting problem? It's hard to say because it's such a siloed process.
I think one way of looking at that too is to look at what innovation is not, right?
Yep.
Is that, to me, innovation is not continuous improvement.
Right.
I think continuous improvement is foundational, but it is not innovation. This is not a podcast on continuous improvement, right?
What is continuous improvement?
that may be a different podcast, right?
Yeah, that's a different
But
one. Yeah.
To me, continuous improvement, it can be more incremental or progressive elaboration. Only have that mindset, I think you can miss the leap necessary to innovate. So I think the challenge for today's organizations is clearly defining the difference in these efforts. Kind of like what you were just saying. You can identify innovation departments or teams. However, you need to identify them, but without putting these efforts in a silo. Putting them in a silo, you can create a situation where they lose sight of what they are actually trying to solve for.
Right.
And I'll give you a great example of a company that does both of these efforts exceptionally well is Toyota, the Prius. Toyota is known across the world for their continuous improvement efforts, but they are also great innovators. Many companies in the last few years have introduced their hybrid or electric vehicles, but I don't think many people realize they unveiled the Prius in 1997.
Really?
Right?
Wow.
1997. 1997. So the vision was exceptional, and the execution was equally as exceptional.
Yeah. Yes. And all the time, they're developing, executing, implementing, rolling out on the Prius. They're still delivering high quality Camrys, high quality Tacomas, and all the other things. And I think you're right. There's not a lot of organizations that can do both well. And I think sometimes we get a little overzealous about how to protect, innovation from continuous improvement thinking. And I think, like you said, it's important to separate the work. I don't think it's important to separate the people.
Right.
And I think that's where they go wrong is you can have a portfolio of 25 projects and 10 of them are innovative projects. 10 of them are things to keep the lights on and 5 of them are, iffy moonshot kind of things. What has happened in the last 20 years is people have started splitting those up. Okay, we're going to have a team that does these and a team that does these and a team that does those. But I think it's really just the thinking that has to be separated. It doesn't have to be the people, and keeping the people together gives you the opportunity to have more diversity of thought applied to these issues.
Absolutely. And I think that is a really good point about separating, siloing, is that you can identify these groups because, I think it's important, but you want great collaborators on with this group that you've identified. They need to be able to work, again, with people and not through them, because that way you're going to get the maximum amount of exposure to the problem.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. We've talked about innovation, what it is. We've talked about what it isn't. Britt, do you have any advice for innovators out there?
For me, innovation has helped me be very people driven and, again, highly collaborative. I don't have all the answers, but the people that make, create, deliver, or use the products do collaboratively. I'd say there's no one size fits all solutions. And the people of the organization are essential in building or developing anything. I also think service innovation is underappreciated. Wait times and delays, for instance. We all have waited somewhere at a baseball game, on a call with the cable company.
Yeah.
And this expense to a company can be really hard to quantify, which makes it hard to measure.
Goodness.
And Henry Ford is quoted as saying, and I think you know the quote, from time waste, there can be no salvage. It is easiest of all waste and the hardest to correct because it does not litter the floor. The velocity of goods and services is an extremely important area of focus for organizations. So I'd say that, and also to never stop, be determined and act with purpose. Never stop learning, because that is the seed of innovation. We talked about that.
Yep.
It enables the insight. Going back to Fleming, think about the training he had to be able to recognize, isolate, and test. The mold was the door. He, through learning, had the key to unlock his potential.
Right. Yeah. Well, brother, thank you for agreeing to record one of our mini conversations. I appreciate it.
That's no problem. And I will say this, Jared. One last final advice to anyone, no matter the role you have in an organization, is to imagine if every problem we face we approach like the square peg in Ron Howard's Apollo 13. So, imagine if someone says to you, this area needs food and we cannot consistently deliver food to this food desert. And your reply was, well, I think we can invent a way to deliver food to this food desert consistently. And we've talked about medicine, sports, cars, space, but the commonality is innovation. It's everywhere. And if you approach problems with this mindset, I think you will achieve great things.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Brett, for that. Anytime I get to talk to you is a pleasure. And we talk often, but it's always great. And thank you for your partnership and collaboration in helping to build and grow Outlast, your supply chain expertise, and just your expertise and knowledge in the corporate space on how things work and how things get done has been a huge boost to how we do work. And I just enjoy working with you. So thank you for that, and looking forward to continue to serve clients together and maybe hang out a little bit too.
Yeah, and same to you. Very happy to be here.
All right, take care, brother. We'd love to hear your thoughts about this week's show. You can drop us a line on Twitter at Outlast LLC. OUTLAST LLC, or follow us on LinkedIn, where we're OUTLAST Consulting. Until next time, keep innovating, whatever that means.